So thank you very much for the invitation and kind introduction. And actually, when I listened to your keynote, I was a little bit scared. So if altmetrics declared dead, we can all go home now and do other stuff. But I think that's not what you meant. And actually, you will see my presentation that I have a very similar view on this, which is basically we are past the honeymoon and now some real work begins. And that also includes sometimes boring and time-consuming working groups in standards organizations like NISO. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next 15 minutes. This is the official title. The unofficial title is The Tale of the Two Todds. And if you know NISO just a little bit, I think it's pretty clear who the first Todd is. If I can make this work. This is a NISO project which is funded by the Sloan Foundation with a grant awarded almost 2 years ago and running another year in 2 phases. And Todd Carpenter basically did all the work of grant writing, and he later brought me on board, in addition to all the other people working on this project in their spare time, to help a little bit with the work involved in this. And the first phase was really going out to the community in 3 in-person meetings and lots of emailing, talking, and also interviewing 30 people in more detail to find out what people think are the issues in this topic. And it was very important that in the first phase we didn't take experts and ask them what they would like to see fixed, but we asked everyone, and we summarized this in the white paper which was published last summer. And the paper had about 30 recommendations of things that need work, and that also might be something for a standards organization like NISO, so best practices, recommendations, etc. And in sort of the last few months of last year, the NISO membership and business committees sort of made a selection out of these 30 things, what should the second phase on the project work on, and picked 5 of the most relevant topic, and I think there was little disagreement that they are all important, and I will basically go through these 5 and explain why we're working on this. And the title of the presentation, Lessons Learned, sounds almost like we have solved all this, but actually we're in the middle of the process, and the 3 working groups working on these 5 topics, one has met once, the second one is meeting for the first time tomorrow, so we're really just getting started with that part. So now I want to introduce the second Todd, Todd Vision. Also someone who many of you know. He is a professor of biology in the University of North Carolina, and this is a data set he has published in 2011. And that goes back to what we heard earlier today, which is for his career, for his reputation, he wants to get credit for this data set. Of course, there are many other reasons why this is an interesting data set with interesting data, which, of course, is, again, about what we're talking about here. So this is just to demonstrate that where this second phase of the project starts, the first step is really use cases. So what problems are we trying to solve? And when you do that, you have to think about who are you talking to. So Todd is a researcher. He's interested in his personal advancement as a researcher and assessment of his work. He might have his university who's looking at his work and is making decisions about helping him or not helping him so much. And then there's, of course, other players in this. One example is, of course, that Todd is sort of one of the people behind founding Dryad, the data archive. And if you are doing a data archive, of course, you're interested that the data that you publish, that they also are seen as valuable. So use case is really important, and that's what the first working group started out right away. And Michael Habib from Elsewhere, who is one of the co-chairs, really put this as the first thing we have to do is not to talk about what we're talking about, which is definitions, which I come to in a moment, but really what problems are we trying to solve. And I think what we heard earlier today, there are also many problems that you can solve with altmetrics, but maybe they're not the problems we want to solve because they are sort of interesting buzz about stuff, but not something that really needs our attention too much. So that's the first of the 5 parts that this group is working on, co-chaired by, as I said, Michael Habib from elsewhere, and Mike Showalter from Plum Analytics, which is one of a few commercial organizations providing these kinds of metrics. This is an example of a National Science Foundation funded project that PLOS is involved in together with California Digital Library and Data One, which is a network of data repositories that includes Dryad. And here in this project that started a few months ago, we have collected metrics for this data set that includes these two, we call them events because that's already where it gets tricky, whether these are citations. So the first one below is, of course, the paper associated with the data set. And the second one is a commentary in Nature, also mentioning and linking to the data set. So what I'm trying to point out here is really the problem that the same working group is also trying to solve: definitions. So what is it that we're talking about? The problem with alt metrics is that there's a lot of emphasis on the alt in measurement, but there's also the alt in research outputs going beyond the paper. And then, for example, here, one question would be, is a citation in a comment, not in a sort of research paper, is that a different kind of metric than a citation in another research paper? Or is a Wikipedia page mentioned in articles something completely different? And there are all kinds of things that this group needs to discuss. And that includes, of course, the word alt metrics that we heard earlier today that I think it sticks for the time being, but not everybody is happy with the term for reasons that were mentioned by Cassidy. So just staying with this dry data set, of course, you can also link this to the people. So this data set had 3 authors. 2 of them have linked or claimed the data set in their ORCID profile. And that's also an important aspect, which is moving from the data set or from the papers to the people doing the work. And that link needs, of course, infrastructure to enable that, and ORCID is central to that. And I think Laura will talk much more about this. And the link between data and people and identifiers is something where, I don't know, maybe there will also be an announcement about a major grant that was recently given to promote that work. So the second group, one aspect of this work is really, if you want to make metrics work, you need persistent identifiers, and you have to link research outputs to people, to institutions. You need identifiers for research outputs that can be used to collect metrics. And this group is led by Christy Holmes and Mike Taylor. Again, I think 2 people many of you know. This is, again, the same data set from Dryad in Mendeley. And there are 2 things I want to emphasize here. First is that you see the data quality isn't totally good. So you see the title on the author list is a little messed up. And that is sort of the misconception that many people have that DOI is a DOI, which is not true. This is a data site DOI, and DOI is a basic mechanism to resolve to URL, but there's a lot of services infrastructure built around them, and Crossref has different services and data site. And integrators like Mendeley, they, for example, maybe right now they don't integrate as well with DataCite as they do with Crossref. So you see further down related papers, that's the associated article, and the metadata there is much nicer. So just giving something a DOI and saying you have solved the problem in the context of metrics is just not true. And of course, things get much more difficult if you have other identifiers, and that's one of the problems we try to solve in this data metrics project funded by NSF that I mentioned earlier on, where we have arcs and URLs and all kinds of identifiers. Another reason I point this out is you see this data set has 12 readers in Mendeley, and then it's a good question, what does it mean to bookmark a data set? And also you see 39 readers for the associated articles, so how these 2 relate to each other. So the question that this second group is also trying to address is what are appropriate metrics for special kinds of research outputs. So do you need the same metrics for data set as you use for a journal article? Citations, is this the same thing? Are they as important for data? And every indication that is so. What about bookmarks like Mendeley? Usage data is another big topic where we have just started to explore that. So for example, standards like Counter, they don't really work with data sets because there's just a lot of automatic access which will be filtered out by the Counter sort of blacklist of robots. And that's what this group is working on. And the last bit in the last group is another problem that we have heard several times. This is a slide from a presentation given at last year's Altmetrics conference in Bloomington, which was comparing the same set of 1,000 random PLOS papers using 3 different Altmetrics providers and the data collected on the same day. This was work done by Zoe Zaredi from Leiden University and Rodrigo Costas. And this is first to show you there is a problem and also to explain a little bit why this is so. So on top you see Mendeley, and it's a single service, and you talk to the API and you should get the same numbers. Maybe if you update your data not often enough, there's a slight difference, but actually at this point in time there were some issues with getting the Mendeley data and updating them, which at least from our end we have since resolved. Twitter is a much more difficult service because there's not a single place where you always get the same numbers, but you have to build your own service or you have to pay somebody. And here you see that Altmetric.com and PLOS do this differently and we come to different numbers. Another problem with Twitter is the best way to do this is to pay somebody, and the company that was very good in this, DataSift, was told by Twitter that they have to stop offering the service in the summer. So we will see what happens to Twitter metrics in our community. And the last one, Facebook, points to a very different problem. The number of Facebook numbers that PLOS is collecting for the same articles is very, very different from Altmetric.com. And the reason is simply what we call Facebook is something else. Altmetric.com only looks at public wall posts, where they can not only show the number, but the actual person and text. And there are many good reasons why they do that, whereas PLOS is also collecting all the likes and shares that Facebook is providing. So the reason that they're different, there are very specific reasons for the different services, but the bottom line is that it's a really big problem because if you tell someone my paper was tweeted 12 times, you go to a different service, was tweeted 20 times, then it's really difficult to have a discussion. Of course, this is a problem that we also know from traditional citations, and every researcher knows that if he needs a number that's a little higher, he goes to Google Scholar or Scopus versus Web of Science, for example, or, for example, PubMed is providing even lower numbers. So it's a problem that's inherent to metrics, but it's also a problem in this space. And that is the last group, which is really working on data quality, which is about trusting these numbers. So I think there are many issues that are hard or impossible to solve. And Twitter is a good example that it's a really difficult service to work with. So, for example, because they don't really store things long enough. And at the same time, Twitter is very interesting. So it's most important that the community starts to address the problem, not finding solutions for everything, but if we just, everybody collects these numbers and they're different, that's just not a state we want to be in much longer. This group is chaired by Stephanie Haustein, who is a bibliometrician, and Greg Tannenbaum from Spark. And with that, I thank Todd, Nettie, and Juliana from NISO, the 6 co-chairs from the working groups, and the Sloan Foundation for this work. Thank you.